Good day, everyone. I'm Jana Limado from Group 1, and together with my group mates Irene Candelaria, Danica David, Francesca Flores, and Ezra Zenerosa, we'll be presenting about Cebu Pacific. But before we go into the details, first, we'll be talking about the aviation industry in the Philippines.
The air transport sector has made major contributions to the Philippines' economy. Among the main contributions are the following: its country's jobs, the value of GDP, and the overall connection of the Philippines within and outside the country. The aviation sector supports nearly 1.2 million jobs in the country, from airline and aircraft-related businesses to the buying of goods and services and jobs related to foreign tourists. The aviation sector spending totaled to nearly 10.4 billion US dollars, or 3.4% of the country's overall GDP. Founded in 1996, Cebu Pacific is known as a no-frills, low-cost airline in the Philippines. It operates from 7 strategically placed hubs which include Manila, Cebu, Clark, Calibo, Iloilo, Davao, and Cagayan de Oro. It offers 25 international destinations and 36 domestic destinations. Moreover, Cebu Pacific is also known for its competitive, fast, flexible, and straightforward air cargo carrier services in the Philippines.
Moving on to the COVID-19 impact on Cebu Pacific, due to the pandemic, Cebu Pacific Airlines swung to an operating loss of about 20.8 billion pesos, or approximately 428 million US dollars in 2020. Besides that, there was a 78% decline in total passengers that flew from 2019. Although commercial operations have resumed, this has become a challenge for most airlines considering it resulted in various requirements and processes from local government units. In response to the COVID-19 impact, Cebu Pacific resorted to reducing operating expenses and pushed for cost-saving initiatives. Until today, Cebu Pacific is doing all needed endeavors to ensure the carrier stays formidable and committed to providing safe, reliable, and affordable transport services for everyone.
To begin, let's start by discussing the process of employing workers. When it comes to the Philippine aviation industry, the Civil Aviation Authority stands as the regulating body. Such authority is mainly in charge of regulating the following: the technical, operational, safety, and security aspects of aviation. It maintains the sole registry of aircrafts and lanes, and other interests in aircraft or aircraft engines. Cebu Pacific Airlines strictly follows the regulations provided by the PCAA, and thus abides by the regulations say regarding employee hiring for their business. As for the flight crew, the authority may approve an applicant so long as they are able to meet the following requirements as per the PCAR, or the Philippine Civil Aviation Regulation, as provided by the CAA. This represents all needed licenses, ratings, and training courses, as well as refreshers. Only the accomplishments of the training program will these applicants be accepted as part of Cebu Pacific's flight crew, as seen in this slide. The Authority Training Organization requires that the hired staff for training must include the following employees as per the accordance of PCAR Part 3.2.2. 1. An accountable manager. 2. A quality manager. 3. A head of training. 4. A chief flight instructor. 5. A chief ground instructor. And lastly, an adequate number of ground and flight instructors needed for all required courses. All personnel required by the authority are expected to be trained by approved instructors depending on the line of work. All personnel are also ensured to receive continuous and appropriate training concerning their tasks and responsibilities, all of which include needed skills and knowledge for their field. When it comes to aviation maintenance, air traffic controllers, flight operations officers, and aeronautical station operators, the authority approves of the following courses of instruction for applicants so long as the applicant is able to meet the requirements of the CAA's regulation. Among are the needed license courses and ratings for these roles as seen on the screen. The Authority Training Organization shall assure to the authority that there are adequately numbered qualified staff to be employed for the training for these type of work. The staff are among the following as per the regulation in Part 3.3.3. 1. An accountable manager. 2. A quality control manager. 3. A head of training. And lastly, adequate number of instructors for the needed relevant courses. Similar to the personnel for training for flight crew members, the staff hired must receive initial and continuous training required of the tasks and responsibilities assigned. Next would be for air operators. All air operators must be able to attain air operator certificates issued by the Republic of the Philippines to be fit for the role, as per Part 9 of the PCAR. When it comes to commercial air transport operations, it is expected that the operators have qualified personnel, all with proven competency in civil aviation. These hired personnel must be available to serve the following positions based on their credentials. 1. A Director of Operations. 2. A Head of Training for Flight Crew. 3. Chief Pilot. 4. A Director of Safety. 5. A Director of Maintenance. And lastly, a Quality Manager. All personnel are expected to have the competency in civil aviation. This is defined by authority as having technical qualifications and management experience as approved by the authority themselves. These personnel are expected to be qualified through training and expertise as provided and required by the CAA. With that, now we can discuss the employment flexibility in Cebu Pacific Airlines. As aforementioned, Cebu Pacific follows the regulations set by the Philippine Civil Aviation Authority. The PCAR has sections which specifically state all requirements needed for employees of the company to qualify under their field of work. The PCAR Part 3 and Part 9 specifically disclose the requirements for employees in an airline, from the flight crew to personnel, operators, and many more. All needed training courses, licenses, certifications, and ratings are also presented for the knowledge of all who desire to apply for their specific positions. Seeing as the regulations are very strict and demands a multitude of licenses, ratings, and training, it can clearly be seen that when it comes to Cebu Pacific's employment flexibility under the CAA, it is very rigid. The aviation sector demands strict safety and control, especially considering the fact that the business in itself is dangerous and holds the lives of multiple passengers. The business itself also heavily relies on customer satisfaction for their brand image, and so it is expected that employees and staff hired do their jobs the best they could to assure the market's attention. Not only that, the tolerance for airport service failures are very hard to recover from. With that, only the best performance is expected of its workers.
Let's now move on to Cebu Pacific's process of enforcing contracts. The Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines and the Civil Aeronautics Board are the two government bodies that regulate the Philippine aviation industry. CAAP aims to provide a safe, efficient, secure, and environmentally compliant air transportation system in the country. As mentioned earlier, CAAP regulates the technical, operational, safety, and security aspects of aviation and maintains the sole registry for aircraft and liens and other interests in aircraft or aircraft engines. It is also responsible for the issuance of air operator certificates to air carriers and certificates of airworthiness for aircraft. On the other hand, CAB, as an attached agency of the Department of Transportation, is in charge of the economic aspects of air transportation, as well as the issuance of the administrative franchise for domestic carriers and foreign air carrier permits. CAB also performs quasi-judicial functions. Aviation-related disputes in the Philippines typically involve consumer protection and liability. Most of these cases are settled with the complainant, while others are resolved by the courts. Given this, we will focus the discussion on consumer protection and liability. Cebu Pacific follows customer service policies that are aligned with its commitment in providing delightful customer experiences while delivering excellent and sustainable business outcomes. The company is specifically directed by the guidelines as set forth in the Air Passenger Bill of Rights in accordance with the Montreal Convention. Ratified in 2012, the Air Passenger Bill of Rights aims to protect travelers from malpractices by local and domestic airlines. It covers three major rights of passengers, namely, the right to be provided with accurate information before purchase of the ticket, the right to receive the full value of the service purchased, and the right to compensation. In 2015, the Philippines acceded to the Montreal Convention. The Montreal Convention established a new liability system and legal framework which was expected to minimize costly litigation. According to the International Air Transport Association, it gives consumers better protection and compensation, while airlines enjoy greater certainty about the rules affecting their liability. Let's now discuss consumer protection and liability for passenger protection. First, we have flight delays and cancellations. During flight delays and cancellations, Cebu Pacific aims to keep passengers informed to allow passengers to make alternative plans. In the case of a planned disruption,
Cebu Pacific will send a text message and/or email notification to affected passengers using the contact details they have provided in their booking. Notifications may also be provided through Cebu Pacific's social networking sites and corporate website. On the other hand, in the case of an on-the-spot disruption due to environmental, operational, or technical reasons, notification is provided by the relevant frontline team and/or through automated text and email. During these instances, Cebu Pacific ensures that the customer's welfare is taken care of by providing different options to passengers as guided by the Air Passenger Bill of Rights specifically outlined in Section 11 and 12. In the case of flights delayed for more than 2 hours, the air carrier must provide the passengers with free meals, communication, and first aid medicines as needed. In the case of flights deferred until the next day, the air carrier must provide the passengers with free meals, hotel accommodation, and communication. In the case of flight cancellations attributable to the air carrier must provide passengers with free meals, hotel accommodation, transportation from the airport to the hotel, free communication, and first aid medicines as needed. Here are some scenarios of flight delays and cancellations with the corresponding options available to passengers. As seen in the table, in most scenarios, the passengers are given the following options. First is rebooking for travel within 90 days, waive fare difference and any applicable penalty fees. Second is conversion to travel fund with validity of 2 years, or third is refund according to original form of payment. Now we move on to passenger protection involving oversold flights. As permitted by CAB, air carriers are allowed to overbook by 10% to offset possible losses for no-shows. However, the air carrier must be held accountable for any expense, consequence, or inconvenience caused to affected passengers. The air carrier must provide air passengers who are willing to give up their seats a list of amenities and offers from which they can choose from. It must always include the option to be given priority booking in the next flight with available space or to be endorsed to another air carrier on payment of any fare difference as well as a cash incentive. Moving on to passenger protection involving lost, damaged, or destroyed luggage. Cebu Pacific gives effort in returning the mishandled baggage within 24 hours and entitles reimbursement for any fee charged to the affected passenger. Cebu Pacific follows these specific guidelines. For all scenarios, passengers must immediately file a property irregularity report. For delayed baggage, Cebu Pacific will provide 2,000 pesos compensation to the passenger for every 24 hours of delay. The company will also provide a first need compensation if the passenger is not a resident at the destination. For damaged baggage, if damage is proven not to be caused by regular wear and tear, the company will compensate based on the Philippine Air Passenger Bill of Rights or the Montreal Convention. For lost baggage, the company will provide 2,000 pesos compensation to the passenger for every 24 hours of delay until baggage is considered lost. Compensation is also based on the Philippine Air Passenger Bill of Rights or the Montreal Convention. Now for passenger protection for refund processing. According to company policy, all Cebu Pacific bookings are non-refundable unless otherwise stated. The company requires passengers with disrupted flights to request for refund within 1 year from the date of disrupted flight, and the refund will be processed in the original form of payment subject to fair rules. What are the reporting requirements for air accidents? The chairman of the Aircraft Accident Investigation and Inquiry Board under the Office of the Director General of the Philippines Civil Aviation Authority must be notified immediately when an aircraft accident occurs. This also applies when an aircraft is overdue and is believed to have been involved in an accident. How are air accidents investigated? Aircraft accident investigations are private. It commences on the appointment of investigators and advisors by the chairman. The procedure to be followed is determined by the chair while ensuring that it is aligned with the purpose, principles, and objectives of the International Civil Aviation Organization. During the course of the investigation, if it was determined that an act of unlawful interference was involved, the Philippine National Police and other aviation security authorities will be informed immediately. What are the liabilities arising from air accidents? Airlines are bound to observe extraordinary diligence over the safety of passengers. In the case of death, injury, or loss, airlines are presumed to have been at fault or to have acted negligently, unless they can prove that they observed extraordinary diligence. Let's now discuss consumer protection and liability for marketing and advertising. As stated in Section 5 of the Air Passenger Bill of Rights, passengers are entitled to the right to clear and non-misleading advertisements, the right to full, fair, and clear disclosure of services offered by carriers, and the right against misleading and fraudulent sales promotion practices. Moving on to consumer protection and liability for complaints handling. For complaints handling, air carriers must deploy customer service representatives on the ground to address common problems. CAB provides complaints and assistance desks in all airports to be manned by deputized personnel in order to assist passengers whose rights to the service have not been fully satisfied by the air carriers. The personnel also assists in the filing and prosecution of the complaints of passengers whose rights have been violated and who wish to pursue the concerned airline. To contextualize the prior discussion on consumer protection and liability, here are some of the issues Cebu Pacific faced over the years concerning mishandled baggage, delayed flights, and refund processing. In 2012, delayed baggage triggered a scuffle among famous personalities. Cebu Pacific claims delayed baggage was due to weight limitations and for safety reasons. In December 2014, Cebu Pacific left thousands of passengers stranded due to delayed and overbooked flights at NAIA, which prompted government authorities to step in. Cebu Pacific was met with many complaints of irate passengers. Because of this fiasco, Cebu Pacific offered to fully reimburse the affected passengers. The company was also fined 52 million pesos. With the unprecedented number of refund requests due to flight cancellations caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, Cebu Pacific asked for patience and consideration from customers for delay in processing refunds. In order to address this problem, the company has revamped its refund process procedures in order to handle the volume of requests. Overall, Cebu Pacific, like other airlines in the country, is governed by the CAAP and CAB. When dealing with dispute resolutions, Cebu Pacific must strictly adhere to the laws set forth by the government bodies involved. The Air Passenger Bill of Rights is just one of the frameworks that the company must follow in conducting its business, given that the safety and welfare of passengers always take the top priority. As such, the company is strictly required to align its company policies with the rules and guidelines given by the regulating bodies, as well as the other laws of the Philippines.
Let's now proceed to the discussion of taxes that apply to the provision of air carrier services. The income of a domestic carrier is subject to the regular corporate income tax for domestic corporations at the rate of 30% on all income received within or outside the Philippines, or a minimum corporate income tax of 2% on their gross income, whichever is higher or as otherwise provided in the legislative franchise granted to them. As for the value-added tax and common carriers tax of domestic carriers, the transport of passengers and cargo is subject to 12% value-added tax on its gross sales. However, these excludes the transport of passengers and cargo by a domestic air carrier from the Philippines to a foreign country, which is subject to a 0% rate. On the other hand, the income of an international carrier doing business in the Philippines is generally subject to a 2.5% tax on its gross revenue derived from carriage of persons, excess baggage, cargo, and mail originating from the Philippines on a continuous and uninterrupted flight, irrespective of the place of sale or issue and place of payment of the ticket or passage document. Also, lower rates may be applicable under tax treaties. In addition, international air carriers doing business in the Philippines are subject to a 3% tax on their gross receipts derived from the transport of cargo from the Philippines to another country. However, President Duterte has recently signed the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises or CREATE Bill, which is now Republic Act No. 11534 that finally lowers the highest corporate income tax in Southeast Asia. With this law, corporate income tax in the country, which is equivalent to 30%, is lowered to 25% for large corporations and 20% for small businesses. This lowered corporate income tax somewhat helped the Cebu Pacific, as provision for income tax was cut to 149.4 million pesos, considering that the airline recorded an 83% drop in revenues to 2.7 billion pesos, with passenger revenues falling 92%. So that ends our presentation about Cebu Pacific. Thank you everyone for listening, and please watch out for the part 2 regarding one of the major suppliers of Cebu Pacific, Petron Corporation.